Welcome to 10 of the most exciting facts about Everest. From crazy to stinkiest to straight up unheard, these facts will take us up to the top of the world to hang out with jumping spiders. Let's get right into the first crazy fact about Everest. Number 1. Mount Everest is not the tallest mountain in the world. This needs a little bit of explanation. Although Everest is the highest point above sea level at 8,848 meters, it is not the tallest mountain from base to peak. That record belongs to Hawaii's Mauna Kea at 10,210 meters. If that wasn't enough to get you scratching your head, what if I told you that Mount Everest isn't even the furthest location from the planet's center? What? That record actually belongs to Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador. The summit is over 6,800 feet farther from Earth's center than Mount Everest's summit. Now don't go around arguing with climbers about the tallest mountain in the world. Everest has and will continue to have those honors, especially since the mountain is still growing at around 4 millimeters annually, or about 40 centimeters on average every century. This means, on average, the mountain grows the equivalent of a newborn baby every century. Maybe that is why point number 2 is true. Number 2. Mount Everest has many names. Just like naming a newborn baby, there have been arguments about what to name the mountain. Before the initial surveys of the mountain in 1841 by Sir George Everest, Everest was known by many different names. For example, the Tibetan people called it Chomolungma, which means Mother Goddess of the Earth. And in Nepali, it was referred to as Sagarmatha, which means Goddess of the Sky. But it doesn't stop there. The Chinese also had their own name for it, Komolangmafang, which translates to Goddess Mother of the Snows. And finally, before it got its final name of Everest, the mountain was actually known as Peak 15, which was given in the initial surveys in 1841. So how did Everest finally get its name? Well, by some British dudes in the 19th century. The Royal Geographic Society subsequently pronounced the official name Mount Everest in 1865 based on the recommendation of Andrew I, the British Survey General of India, who was Sir George Everest's successor. So next time you're taking a casual stroll on the slopes of Everest, make sure to impress all of your friends with your big rock-hard brain and all the different ways you can name Everest. Number 3. Humans were not the first to climb Everest. What? It is commonly believed that Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary were the first to climb Everest, but a new contender for the first ascent of the tallest mountain in the world has been discovered. The Himalayan jumping spider has been living on Everest for thousands of years. As the highest permanent resident on Earth, living at 6,700 meters, these spiders live in cracks and fissures on the slopes of Mount Everest. With the record for the highest creatures in the world, the arachnids have earned their scientific name, Omnispcer, which literally means standing above all in Latin. Rumor has it that Jeffrey, the jumping spider, was able to climb Everest in 1951, 2 years before Norgay and Hillary's summit. I recently reached out to the spider community about Jeffrey, but sadly, there was no response. Number 4. Is Everest an old grandpa or still a young lad? Not only is Mount Everest the highest mountain in the world, but also one of the most confusing. Spotting the difference between a youngster and an older adult is easy, but when it comes to Everest, it's not so straightforward. Discussing Everest's age, you might be surprised when you get a few different answers. First, the mountain itself is considered to be a youngster, with an approximate age of 50 to 60 million years. However, this is vastly different from the age of the limestone and sandstone found on the mountain. In 1924, explorer Noel Odell was the first to uncover marine fossils on Mount Everest, establishing that an ocean originally covered the mountain range. This discovery and the age of the sediments on the peak pointed to the mountain being well over 60 million years old. The actual age is approximately 450 million years. Originally, the mountain started as a giant mass of rocks on the ocean floor, and over time, as the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates collided, they created an upward thrust that propelled the rocks skyward, a force that has continued to this day, causing the mountain to grow nearly 1/4 of an inch every year. Number 5. More people have climbed Mount Everest than have broken the 4-minute mile. Climbing Everest is considered to be a massive feat in itself. However, to date, more than 5,000 people have stood on the top of Everest, over 9,000 total times, and it is increasing at an accelerated rate. A study by the University of Washington shows that the success rate of summiting Mount Everest has doubled in the last 3 decades. The number of successful climbs compared to the staggeringly low number of people who have run a mile under 4 minutes, which currently stands at about 1,500, is extremely low. So how is this possible when everyone has access to running? Well, climbing Everest has become significantly easier over time. As the mountain has become more commercialized and the business opportunity with it more lucrative, the focus has been put on making it as easy as possible. Really, the only major barrier to climbing Everest is its hefty price tag. But when it comes to running a sub 4-minute mile, an athlete must have a high level of cardiovascular fitness. So unless you have perfect technique and an attitude like Forrest Gump, you may want to decide on summiting Everest instead and join the more than 5,000 people who have climbed it. Fun fact for you, there is an Everest marathon if you want to break the 4-minute mile and summit Everest at the same time. Number 6. An elephant's weight worth of poop is frozen on Everest every year. Going to the bathroom is easy, except for when you're on Everest. The extreme weather on the mountain means digging latrines is impractical, and going outside means you'll have a higher risk of frostbite and hypothermia. So where do all the climbers go? Well, they go in their tents and use pee bottles and waste bags. But what about the feces and pee after, you ask? The climbers are supposed to carry it off the mountain. However, this does not always happen. This has resulted in 8,000 kgs of feces being left on the mountain yearly, equivalent to a full-grown African elephant. This has led to a major environmental issue, as the feces does not decompose in the permanently frozen higher altitudes. So if you decide to summit Everest, be prepared to carry out a Santa's sack full of your own poop. Or if you can't do that, make sure you can hold it in for the roughly 3-month climb. Number 7. There's a 2 o'clock rule when it comes to climbing Mount Everest. Serious mountaineers and guides will have a turn-back time on the summit day no later than 2 or 3 p.m. This is because oxygen is normally calculated for a specific time, and if they push the turnaround time past 2 o'clock, the climbers risk the chance of running out of oxygen during their descent. Another reason for the 2 o'clock rule is that it is extremely difficult to descend in the darkness. For one, at the beginning, climbers have more energy, generate more heat, and have more oxygen in their tanks and hot water in their bottles. But on the way down, they've expended most of their energy, willpower, and oxygen, which all adds up to a dangerous situation in the dark. If you leave at midnight and have not summited by nightfall, that means you have been in the death zone for approximately 18 hours. And as they say, speed is safety on high altitude mountains. Few people survive the death zone longer than 24 hours, as your body is actively dying every minute you are in it. This is why the death zone is known as Rainbow Valley, as it's claimed more lives than any other part of the mountain. Number 8. It takes 10 weeks to climb Mount Everest. The actual ascent takes only a few days from the lowest base camp to the summit, but the whole trip requires a significant amount of time and preparation. One reason it takes so long to climb Everest is the process of acclimatization. As you make your way up the mountain, the air gets thinner and thinner, and if you try to go too fast, you risk getting altitude sickness. Thus, the climbers are forced to do the climb in stages, to allow the body to adjust to the conditions and increase the chances of a safe summit attempt. Another reason it takes 10 weeks to climb Mount Everest is the logistics of the expedition. It takes time to get to base camp, set up camp, and make necessary equipment and supply runs. Plus, guides and trekkers have to be wary of the weather as well and wait for the perfect window. Climbing Mount Everest may take about 10 weeks for most people, but for Lakpa Sherpa, it only took half a day. He set a record for the quickest ascent in Everest in 2003 when he scaled the mountain's south side from base camp to the summit in 10 hours and 56 minutes. Unless your name is Lakpa or lucky enough to do what Dasale did in 2005, you may need to ask your boss for a long vacation from work. Number 9. Only one helicopter has ever landed on Everest's summit. On May 14, 2005, Dasale flew his Eurocopter AS-350 Squirrel helicopter to the top of Mount Everest and set a new record for the highest altitude a helicopter has ever landed. Except for removing a few components like passenger seats to reduce the weight of his aircraft by 265 pounds and increase the fuel range by 1 hour, Dasale used a nearly normal version of the Eurocopter to land on the summit of Everest. Can you believe it? He flew all the way to the top of the highest mountain in the world, cutting the 10-week trip down to only a few hours. But it wasn't easy. Dasale had to run multiple tests to ensure his helicopter could handle the low atmospheric pressure and winds reaching upwards of 186 miles per hour. Battling the lack of oxygen for himself and the helicopter, he had to find updrafts to help him reach the summit. Dasale said he got a couple of lucky breaks as it was so windy up towards the top that an updraft was so strong he could fly up with almost no power. After spending 3 minutes and 50 seconds perched atop the world, Dasale took off and descended to the airport in Lukla. Talk about an epic adventure. And now to think about it, probably a cheaper experience as well, compared to what climbing the mountain usually costs, which brings us to point number 10. You could buy a small house for what it costs to climb Everest. For the price of what it costs to climb Everest, you can buy a Tesla Model 3. You could take a family of 4 to a Super Bowl game, or you could even buy 2 full-size giraffes. But that's just on the cheap side of the range. The typical price ranges anywhere between $40,000 and $85,000. For a completely customized excursion, some climbers pay upwards of $100,000. Of course, these prices vary depending on a variety of things, including time, number of Sherpas, meals, the mode of transportation, gear, and the additional oxygen tanks or other equipment you require. Because of this, climbing Everest is not only physically challenging but also financially. No matter how you decide to climb, you're looking at spending at least a cool $40,000 USD. This doesn't even consider the amount of time you will need to take off to climb the mountain itself. So unless you plan on sneaking up the mountain or catching a ride in Dasale's Eurocopter, you might be better off buying a brand new Tesla instead of climbing Everest. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed these 10 facts. Let me know in the comments if I missed any other crazy facts about Everest.